All right, so good evening. Welcome back. I think this is the second to last installment for our series. This is building your college list. This is actually one of our more brief presentations. However, I think it's the most important part of the college admissions process because it's definitely the foundation of how students should navigate the college admissions process. So here we have building your college list, ways for students to be intentional and strategic when navigating the college admissions process. So greetings, salutations. My name is Ms. Galloway. I'm the person who is sending all of those emails to your student and probably you if you're signed up on Naviance. I do support Carnegie. I'm typically there Mondays and Wednesdays, DeBakey Tuesdays and Thursdays, and HSPDA on Fridays. And so what is a college list and why is it important? How do I start and what should I consider? All of these presentations are the same presentations I typically give to the students. And so as you can see, a lot of the verbiage is going to be coming from a student essentially. So what is a college list? It's definitely a refining process, but essentially it's the student's comprehensive list of schools and universities that they plan to apply to. This process should definitely be based on research and based on their academic profile. Oftentimes students have very interesting and sometimes intense college lists. For example, they may have 20 reach schools on their list and maybe one safety. And so that's not exactly realistic. So typically when taking students through this process, I try to get them to understand that it's important that they're applying to colleges that are a best fit and a best match based on their academic profile. For example, if you have a student with a 1.9 GPA, we don't necessarily need to be applying, to like University of Texas at Austin, Texas A&M. For one, that's a waste of money because you probably are paying $75 to $90 for college applications. And two, it just kind of saves time and a little disappointment in the long run. And so why is building a college list so important? Again, intentionality is important for students to ensure that they're applying to schools that make sense. Like I said, oftentimes students are kind of putting all their eggs in one basket by applying to one school or applying to too many schools that are technically out of their reach. And so shifting, we want students to be strategic. Also, it saves time. Whenever it comes to deciding which school they want to apply to, it's also just prioritizing their options. It's a lot of being organized because if you're a student who's applying to a list that has 10 schools on it, but it's a good list of 10 schools, you're going to be receiving a lot of emails from those colleges. You have to keep up with a lot of logins for their portals. And so it's important for them to be organized. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, it informs the best fit, best match. And so factors that students and parents should definitely consider when they're building their list. So for one, how do you even get started? And then what are some ways to stay organized and keep track of deadlines? So I think one big one is tuition and financial aid. Oftentimes we have students who are considering going to Rice, and although they definitely could potentially achieve that, oftentimes when they see how much money they are expected to put forward, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so I think tuition and financial aid is one big consideration that a lot of families take into consideration when deciding where they want to go. Students should also kind of consider where the institution is located. So if you're someone who does not like the snow, maybe staying in the southern region or the West Coast is the best fit for you. Also the type of institution, we have public, we have private. Also the setting, is it in a residential area? Is it in a rural area? Also, are these colleges considering my SAT scores? So what is their testing policy? Do I need to submit them? Do I not? Also, how much is housing going to cost, especially if you're going out of state? That can be kind of expensive. I think some secondary things that students should definitely consider is like, what is the acceptance rate? So when you're doing your research, looking at various colleges and their requirements, I think one thing that is not a discouragement, but one thing just to kind of keep in mind is their acceptance rate. So if a school has an acceptance rate of 15%, you know, students kind of course, go for it. We'll never tell a student not to apply, but those are just things we want them to keep in mind. Also, academic programs. So the schools that you're looking at, do they even have the majors that you're interested in? If not, it may be a shift in kind of deciding what you want to do, or maybe that's not a school that you should probably put on your list. Another consideration is definitely that some students look at is like diversity, DEI on their campuses. School size. So are you someone who learns in a very small environment? So would you prefer to go to a smaller school? Or maybe you went to a smaller school in high school and you want to go to a big environment. So kind of what are you looking for in colleges? Also, this is not like a big one, but accreditation is kind of important. I think that kind of speaks to the reputation of many colleges and universities, but it's something some people might consider. I think more of parents and families look at accreditation. And then also, what kinds of extracurriculars and organizations do they have on campus? So for example, students who are athletes, but they don't necessarily want to play for a university or like a division school, most campuses or universities have something called intramural. And so it's the opportunity for you to still enjoy what you love to do, but it's an extracurricular on the side. It's strictly just for fun, essentially. So, and this is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg. But when talking with students and when they're deciding what schools they want to go to, a lot of times, like, well, I really want to go to HTC because I'm concerned about the financial aid aspect, et cetera, and stuff like that. So I think this is a pretty good list that students should take into account. Whenever students are doing research, I just encourage them to, for one, definitely have fun with it. I know when I was in high school and I was deciding where I wanted to go, it was simply just a matter of browsing the website, seeing what they have, kind of like in your free time. It's something that doesn't require a lot of pressure. It's just simply just browsing, kind of seeing what your options are. And then oftentimes when I present this to students, I ask them to reflect on these following prompts here. So as a student, what am I interested in? What am I hoping to get out of my educational experience? Also, what am I passionate about? So if you're someone who's passionate about women's rights, maybe Oberlin College, if that's a fit for you, that's an option. And then also students need to kind of take into account, what's the best way that I learn? If you're someone who, again, as I mentioned earlier, you thrive best in smaller environments, then maybe you want to go to a community college or one of those smaller like liberal arts colleges. And then lastly, what do I think I want to do in the future? Anytime a student comes to me, especially like a 9th or 10th grader, when they come to me and they kind of have, which is good, it's organized, it means they've been thinking about it. But when they have this cookie cutter list of like what they want to do, it kind of scares me just a little bit, only because when you're in 9th grade, you're not the same student you're going to be in 12th grade. So for the most part, if you want to be a doctor, that might be consistent as what you might want to do, but also trying to get students to understand that things do change and it's okay to shift from what you wanted to do before. So just kind of just think about and reflect, what do you think you want to do in the future? Also, many students don't have any idea. And so when I do ask this question, I don't want it to be any pressure, because it's okay to not know exactly what you want to do right now, essentially. And then I think this has been a reoccurring slide in all of the presentations, but it's super important. Whenever you're building your college list, for one, you need to think about what is the college looking for? What do they consider? And so of course, the main things they're looking at are going to be your grades, your GPA. They're definitely going to be looking at SAT scores if they're not test optional, and then maybe your extracurricular activities. They're also going to be looking at your personal statement. That's a big one. Supplementals. So it's also important when students are doing their research, when they're looking at what the requirements are. If you're applying to a school that has like maybe 3 supplementals, you have 2 essays you have to write, that's going to be maybe an application you're going to designate the most time towards, or you're going to give yourself opportunity to work in chunks on those applications. And then also, this isn't like a big one, but demonstrated interest. Oftentimes when students do like those summer bridge programs and like they're under their 9th, 10th, and 11th, sometimes they look at that because if you're able to write on that in your personal statement, that does show demonstrated interest. And then also, again, what do colleges consider? So if you were to rank them, kind of what we talked about in the previous slide, they're looking at your grades, they're looking at the rigor of the courses that you're taking, which again, at Carnegie, students are taking very rigorous courses. Test scores are the next big doozy. And then as you can see, me personally, I would probably put personal statement up after or before activities, but that's just me. Most schools do look at letters of recommendation, but for most of your like in-state Texas schools, that's not like a big requirement. That's mainly going to be like your selective schools. And then rank is last, mainly because Carnegie doesn't rank at all. But again, when students are looking at what kind of colleges they want to go to, for one, they need to look at their academic profile. So sometimes we even have students kind of fill in next to this. So look at their grades, the rigor of their courses, put their personal statement and see kind of how they fare or where there could be improvement for what colleges would consider the documents essentially that they're going to be sending. And then also another good thing when they're building a college list, they have to be mindful of their deadlines. So for one, are they applying early action to a school? Are they doing early decision? Are they doing regular decision? Those are just things that they need to be mindful of when they're prioritizing what schools are going to apply to, which deadlines they're going to use. And it'll make sense as they kind of work through Naviance. And again, in the spring, we typically work with the juniors. We start telling them, hey, let's think of a few schools. We kind of start encouraging them to start thinking about their college list. So we're like, hey, like, what are a few schools that you wouldn't mind applying to? And so they add those schools into their naviance. And then whenever it's time to meet about the schools, me personally, when I meet with students, okay, we bring up GPA, we bring up test scores, and then kind of how they fare with those decisions. And then this is my favorite term to use when I'm speaking with students, when I'm looking at their college list and naviance, I'm like, hey, so I don't see any safety schools. Do you think you could add maybe like 3 safety schools? Is that something that we can do? But often, so how do I suggest students organize and track all of the colleges on their list? Oh, I'm so sorry. I do have dogs. Okay, sorry. Okay, so target schools. Actually, first we'll start with safety. This is kind of how I rank them. So with safety schools, we often refer to these as your backup schools. So these are going to be institutions that we know for sure you're going to get into, right? We usually encourage students to have like at least 3 to 4. For one, you want to ensure that you have a good safety net. So let's say, for example, which we'll talk about on the next slide, let's say you do get into a reach school, but let's say maybe it's a little bit more expensive than you thought. You still have a pretty solid safety net of your safety schools on your list. These are also going to be schools that you're technically overqualified for, quote unquote, and that's not a bad thing. It just means that your GPA and your test score is exceeding what the university is looking for. And then again, as I said, these are mainly going to be your in-state public institutions. So like Texas State, UH is starting not to be so much of a safety school, it's starting to be more of a target just because their requirements are kind of going up. But these are going to be like UTSA, institutions like that, HCC. And then when we look at target schools, this is kind of like in the middle. This is known as like your 50-50 schools, like there's a possibility, maybe not. But for the most part, your application is matching the majority of the students who are admitted to that institution. And so target is pretty spot on. Like when we think of target, we think, okay, these are the schools that I'm like aiming for. And although I'm not quite sure if I'll get in or not, I do think I have very high chances. And so I usually encourage students to have at least 2 to 4 of these on their college list. And then reach schools. These are typically referred to as your dream schools. These are schools that are also highly selective, they're prestigious, and they do have low acceptance rates. So it could be a matter of a student having a perfect score, a 1600 on the SAT, ranking pretty high in their senior class, but these are institutions where they have committees. And so they're looking at stuff and everyone's making a decision on, hey, have you read their personal statement? They make connections and stuff like that. And then also with your reach schools, again, we never encourage students not to apply. We just want them to be knowledgeable in the process and what that looks like. So, hey, you are applying to this school. If you don't get accepted, this doesn't mean that you're not a bad student or that you're not excelling or that you're not well accomplished. It's just that these admissions committees, they meet beforehand and they're just looking for certain things. And so it's kind of like throwing your hat in the wind, essentially. Also with these reach schools, to be honest, anything's possible. But like I said, if your academic profile is not what they're looking for, your chance of being accepted is pretty low. So for example, a student who, there could be, Ms. Chapman says this all the time, there could be a student who maybe wrote a book and got it published. And so they may not have as high SAT score as someone in their class, or their GPA may not be as high either, but just that accomplishment alone and how they wrote about it, could be a factor as to why they got in. And again, it is risky. And so that's why I said, it's definitely a learning process for students. It allows them to go through the process of, okay, I'm applying for this, what all is needed. It makes them organized. Also with some students, it makes them a bit more outgoing. And I also tell students to always advocate for yourself. So with these schools, they're definitely going to be emailing an admissions recruiter or a counselor. Oftentimes with these reach schools, these are the schools that are actually coming to Carnegie. So they usually come in the fall semester and they're signing up. And so during lunch, or I think during SSCP as well, Ms. Chapman kind of has them. So students can come, they can sit down. It's like I said, it is a process, it is a learning experience, definitely for the benefit, but we usually try to encourage students, hey, apply, but just understand low acceptance rates and stuff like that. And then with the college list, this is conducting very thorough research. Again, essentially, the college website is sufficient enough. For one, oftentimes students come to me and they're like, Miss, what's the acceptance rate for like I'm a human robot and I can retrieve it and say it. And so it's a matter of, you know what, I'm not too sure, but we literally have technology and like infinite information at our fingertips. And so oftentimes when students are asking me questions, they're able to see me doing the research myself, because of course I'm not going to have the answer to everything, but we can find it. And so I think that experience alone, students are like, oh, okay, interesting. So the college website is always going to be the best form of communication and accurate information when it comes to deadlines and stuff like that. Naviance is also another really good resource. However, it's not the college website. And so even though we do tell students to use Naviance, you definitely want to, your first reference your first reference needs to be the college website. Also, again, just make sure students need to network. So again, these prestigious universities, also your in-state schools in Texas, they are coming to Carnegie. The visits are plentiful in the fall, not so much in the spring, but students are able to go into Naviance and see, okay, like what colleges are coming to Carnegie for the month of October, and they get to register in Naviance. Also, I tell students if they have a specific question and we try to look for on the website and we couldn't find it, you know, I always tell students to don't be afraid to email admissions, like to email the admissions department with their questions, and they can always CC me on it so that I can receive the answer as well. But students just need to be sure this whole process is extensive, thorough research, and students need to ensure that they are referencing their academic profile when they're looking at these things. So that's why I say Google is your friend. So I tell students, I tell that to them all the time, not to be rude or anything, but essentially Google is your friend. We have so much information at our fingertips. All it takes is a couple searches. Back to Naviance. Like I said, in the spring, we typically do meet with the juniors and we tell them like, hey, they should know about Naviance already, but we tell them like, hey, what are some schools that you're thinking about? Add them on your list. And then, you know, they go through the scatter plots and stuff like that. So again, Naviance is another really good way to stay organized and to do research as well. As I stated in the other presentations, Naviance uses scattergrams to where the student is on the scattergram. I think it dates back to alumni from 2011. So if this student is interested in applying to Rice, they can see where their GPA and their SAT falls within the students who got accepted or students who got denied. So it's a pretty nice tool, I would say sometimes, and also it gives students kind of a good indicator of whether or not this is a school that needs to be added on their list or not. And then again, students just need to understand their deadlines, especially when you're using Common App. These are the terms that they use: regular decision, early decision. We covered this a lot in the other presentation, but a lot of this stuff is important that it does overlap. And so again, their highly selected schools are going to be on Common App. Common App and Naviance talk, or they sync. And so that's why we're always telling students, you need to add your schools on Common App. You need to match your Common App accounts with your Naviance, because this is also how the counselors are sending like their letters of recommendation, school reports, transcripts, and stuff like that. And then Apply Texas is the more easier to navigate. Students also need to add their Apply Texas schools into Naviance, but this is mainly for our Texas schools and universities. And then just some key takeaways. When students are doing research, definitely have fun, but they need to be intentional. Again, oftentimes when we meet with students, they may have like a 3.6, which is good, but they may have like an 11.10 on the SAT, and they're trying to apply to the more selective schools. Not to say that it's not possible. However, then it becomes a conversation of, okay, your personal statement, your activities, what have you done? So it's definitely a layering process, and building your college list is the most fundamental piece of your college admissions process. For one, if you do it right, you don't waste time, for one, and you're being very intentional. Again, like I stated, we do have students who will put 20 colleges on their list. And I mean, I guess, you know, that's cool and all if you're vested, but is your list balanced? So what portion of those schools are going to be a safety school for you, a target, and a match? I don't know why, but students do not like to apply to safety schools, either because they don't want to stay in state or they don't want to stay in Houston. But again, like I said, it's just a good safety net. You just never know. If you apply to UH and you had no intentions of going, they may give you a full ride. It's one of those kind of things. And then also, students just need to know their strengths and weaknesses. And so each student has a very unique and different academic profile and or circumstance apart from each other. And so usually when I sit down and meet with students, which is multiple sessions, it's just identifying ways that they can stand out and set themselves like apart from others. And so that's where intentional advising is typically recommended. And then I just put this at the end of every presentation because financial aid is a graduation requirement. If there are any senior parents on the call, so students can either submit the form or they can opt out. We highly encourage them not to opt out because oftentimes many scholarships they're applying to will require that a financial aid application is on file. And so again, I usually just tell students, talk it over with your parents and whatever you guys decide is the best one, that is the best option for you. And then just some helpful resources, of course, Naviance. College Board is doing their Big Future scholarships right now. And so we've been encouraging the underclassmen to get on top of that. And then again, if you have any students, I know test scores came out recently. If they feel like they didn't perform as well, like at Khan Academy, they can access it through Canvas or digital resources. And it's free, it helps them with content. So Khan Academy is a good resource. And then I believe earlier this week or last week, I posted the hot scholarships for December and January. So students have ample time to complete scholarships. Today, we actually had Miss Rock. She's a volunteer with the Houston Rodeo Foundation. And she presented to the students about that, the seniors, because it's a senior scholarship. But we're trying to get more people on campus, so everything's not as virtual. But that was a hit for one. And then also, if you're interested, if you maybe aren't on Naviance, because like I said, I do send a lot of information, emails to students and parents. I am putting together kind of like a newsletter for parents. So if you would like to receive a lot of that stuff that I send out, you can scan it and then I can add you to it. But a lot of the stuff I send out is going to be primarily for seniors. Just because we're trying to get them ready to go. But starting in the spring semester, we will start focusing more on juniors and like the underclassmen. And I think that's it. Did I hit it in 30 minutes? Oh, almost. Okay. Are we doing questions or do we have a guest speaker?
Thank you so much. We have a guest speaker, Danielle.
Hi. So I thank you. And I'm going to piggyback, I think, on what you said, and then maybe we could take questions together because hopefully my perspective is coming from a different place. And I think it all pretty much jives, but hopefully I don't confuse anyone. My name is Danielle Batchelor. I have a sophomore at Carnegie Vanguard High School. And I have been in charge of the Northwestern University Alumni Admissions Council for the Houston area for prospective students for Northwestern University, north of Chicago, for about a decade or so, which that doesn't mean that I interview every kid, but I interview a lot of kids and coordinate the volunteers and sort of liaise with the university admission department and alumni in our area to help serve, hopefully, the Texas kiddos in our area who want to go there. And so a lot of my insights come from that. The other piece is that I have an affiliation with Harvard University. I did my graduate work there and am on a teaching team for a course in the spring in the Division of Continuing Education each year there. And so I recently sat in on a meeting with the Dean of Admissions for the college, Harvard College, and have some sort of insights that came out of that. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to just tell you what I think are sort of the top zinger things to consider in this process with your child or your person who you're helping guide through this. And then I'm happy to take emails or something after if that's helpful. So the first thing I would say is fit and feel matter. They matter a lot. And so piggybacking on what she said before, if the more specific you can get when you're researching the program, so it's that you want to go to. So it's things like, if you want to go to music school, do you want to go to a program that's a conservatory style where you are going to study music only while in that program? Or do you want to go to a program where it's, your major is in music, it's intense, it's a strong program, say, that maybe you take half your classes in the College of Arts and Sciences or something at the school. So there's things like that to start to unravel. Engineering, for example, some schools like UT, as I understand it, you name your engineering major within engineering from the outset, and it's relatively hard to change. Not impossible, but harder to change. That's part of your acceptance. So whereas other schools, they don't let you determine whether you want to be a computer engineer or an electrical engineer or whatnot at the outset. So things like that can be helpful to start to sort of dig into. How flexible a school is about changing with you, or if you want to try to sort of marry some things that aren't traditionally considered to be things that go together, or that maybe come across different schools of the bigger university. Double majoring, intersectionality between different topics, size, location, the personality of the school, how much exposure you're going to get, I think, to thought leaders and folks in those programs that, or even areas of interest, because let's face it, we're not fully formed when we leave high school or when we're applying to college, hopefully. And so, just, okay, who am I going to get exposure to that will help me grow and expand and learn and see if this is something I want to continue with? What network is that school going to offer you in terms of career planning and things like that later? And also starting to think about, as you grow with the school, what do you think you might need? So I have 2 nieces who are seniors in college at different schools in the New York area, and one of them is at a teeny tiny school, and it's worked out fine. However, when she looked at that school, it still seemed big compared to her high school. Now that she's a senior, it feels really small. So things like that, just trying to sort of imagine yourself, where can you learn and grow? Try to ignore, this is the next one, try to ignore social contagion. You are around tons of really wickedly smart kids, interesting, wholehearted, cool kids at Carnegie Vanguard. I'm really biased. And, the social contagion of like who wants to go where and what they've heard and who's visited can be really like a wave that's overwhelming. And so as best as possible, try to challenge your assumptions and challenge that natural tendency to follow the pack. The next one is don't negotiate against yourself if you can help it from the outset. I think we limit ourselves a lot of times because it's like, oh, I can't afford that, or, oh, the acceptance rate is too low. And I think piggybacking on what was said before, you may have something that sets you apart in a different way or makes you a really good fit for a certain program at that school. And you won't know if you haven't applied. And a word on the financial piece, absolutely, there are schools you won't be able to afford, right? This is life. Though the trend is moving toward more and more schools in the, I think, state schools and also the top tier schools offering packages to students that do not need to be repaid and that apply to far more students than we might otherwise imagine. So, for example, over 50% of Harvard's freshmen incoming class 1 at the college this year have some sort of financial aid. And the Dean of Admissions, Dean Fitzsimmons, has given his word that 90% of the Texas students who are admitted and choose to go there will pay less than they pay at University of Texas. So that sort of blows my mind and spins it off, and that's hard to, some of these schools have such vast endowments and resources, and they've really tried, I guess they realize that they're competing with, the UTs and the Berkeleys and the Michigans of the world. And so just if you can imagine, like if you get into NYU med school as a similar but different example, getting in means the tuition is free. So just don't limit yourself, don't negotiate yourself against yourself too much from the outset, and dig into it a little bit more before you decide whether to apply or not. Some of the acceptance rate piece has also been driven by the Common App. Many more schools take the Common App, and you can apply, I think we were saying before, up to 20 schools, I think, on each for the Common App. And there's just more people applying. So the schools that I have an affiliation with, we had NU had 51,000 applications last year. When I started doing this, I don't know exactly what the number was a decade ago, but it was, I want to say like 10,000 or 20,000 applications. It was vastly lower. Same with Harvard. There were 61,000 applications for the college last year. So some of it is that a lot of kids are applying to a lot of schools. That I'm not saying it, oh, it's so easy to get in, but that number is a bit artificially higher. Okay, the next thing is, I get the question a lot at my home, and other people have asked, do the colleges know that there's a difference, like that Carnegie Vanguard is a Texas public school that is not the same as another Texas public school? Yes, the answer is yes. These schools' jobs is to know all your college counselors, to know the population, to know the neighborhood, the offerings. And when they don't, they will find out. So you can rest assured that they know that a GPA at Carnegie is harder earned than a GPA of the same number at a certain other school, maybe in a tiny rural school that's very small. They also know how many APs are offered and how many extracurriculars and things. And so part of what they're evaluating you on is, what did you do given the relative range of offerings that were at your fingertips? If you are in a tiny school in a small town and they don't offer APs, then, that's awfully hard to hold that against a student. But did you take advantage of everything you possibly could have, or within reason, not you have to sleep, that was offered? And so it's sort of like the rigor and the extras and things that are offered. Where do you fall in terms of your participation in those things? A lot of the schools are also going to optional. I know Harvard, they said they think through 2030 will be test optional. And they're not saying tests don't matter. They think, you learn something from a standardized test, but that tests what it tests. And having grades and performance and growth for 4 years says a lot more than a single day for a few hours. So that's actually another reason why applications have risen and percentages have gone down a bit. So, I don't want to go too off course on test scores. Maybe that's something, if anyone has questions, we can circle back. But that I think has allowed schools to make accessible their programs for more kinds of students. Some students who can't afford to take the test, they don't have access, or they feel like it's really going to be problematic for them for some reason. It offers an opportunity to help them curate classes that bring together students with all kinds of strengths and gifts, and not have it be quite so focused on that, although that is one helpful piece of information. So if you're a Carnegie student who tests well, then you can throw that piece into your portfolio. Okay, I think I only have 2 or 3 more. So most schools, if it's a reach school, top tier sort of school, they're going to have a lot of reads for your application. So I know Northwestern, 3 people will read every single application that comes in. So you will never be dinged or ignored or misunderstood by one individual, which is really important, I think, for our students who are working so hard to know. They are looking at academic readiness and also sort of their interpretation of your academic performance once you're there. And that's a range of things that's not just academic. So it's social emotional, as well. And they're trying to sort of tease that out of the application. Who is going to have sort of reciprocal growth on campus and improvement? Who's going to contribute and also have intellectual humility and collaborative nature and sort of give and take and make the spaces for learning better through their presence. So being a dynamic student is something that I think a lot of these schools, if you're talking about a reach school, they're looking for. So this leads me to sort of my little piece of the world, which is interviewing for college. The interview is an awesome opportunity for you to differentiate yourself from the pack, because we've got all these applications and there's so many amazing students, and on paper they've got great grades or great scores or great stories or, you know, whatever. And this is a way to lift yourself off the page. And for those introverts, if you can believe it, because I'm presenting, maybe I don't seem like one, but I am one. An introvert, I think in a one-on-one setting, it's a really awesome opportunity also to sort of safely, hopefully be able to show who you are and ask questions. And we know as interviewers that there's a difference between being like a great interviewer and being extroverted, that's not, you know, that those are related, and that doesn't necessarily predict someone's success at a given school. So it can be helpful to practice and get sort of comfortable in that way. But this is in almost all situations something that provides upside. Use your manners, be professional, you know, show up on time. These things that are maybe sort of obvious, but aren't if you're juggling a lot as a high school student. Be real and talk about stuff that you actually care about. I would so much rather hear a student talk about like their pickling business that they started or something passionately, and the steps they went through to establish their business and the challenges and the roadblocks and things, then have them wax on about something that is clearly, you know, they think that I want to hear. So we care more about depth than breadth. Having a resume with 3,000 activities where you went to 2 meetings in 4 years for a given activity, we know that, people know that, you know, the application reviewers know that, and the interviewers know that. So it's really an opportunity to insofar as you're comfortable and can, to show up as you are and put your best foot forward and give people an opportunity to get to know you so that you can be differentiated. Know about the school when you get onto the interview, and have some genuine, real questions that are specific to why you actually want to go there. Not things that you can find on the homepage or the brochure in 5 seconds. Not like, oh, I want to go to whatever because it's close to a major city and I like snow. That's fine if you want to throw those things in and they're true. But I would encourage your student to try to find some things that they can emotionally and authentically connect with, that they can talk about as to why they want to go to the school they're interviewing for. That's an opportunity also for them to demonstrate intellectual humility and curiosity and those other sort of dynamic qualities. And my final comment in my whirlwind, I think she gave me 10 minutes and I'm at 11, is apply early decision. If there's a school you love, if there's a school you can excitedly get behind, you have a ridiculously stronger chance of getting in at most schools. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. And it has to do with, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But so you majorly up your chance of going where you want to go. So if you go through the process, or your child or the person you're advising is going through, and there's a school that they feel like, even if it's not their end all be all, but it's like they're excited enough about it that if they got in there, they would be happy to go, and they'll be psyched to not have to spend Christmas and Hanukkah and all the holidays that we're celebrating writing applications, then you should go for it, because it really improves their odds and takes a lot of pressure off for the remaining time of senior year. Okay, sorry, that was fast. And I don't know if we want to do questions now or where
That
we
was
go.
fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're
Danielle.
welcome.
Do we have any, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but do we have anybody who has a question for Danielle or Miss Galloway? No?
Can I just say thank you so much? So much of what Danielle said was spot on. Having had a kid who just went through this, who had like, he's my great tester. He gets that from his dad, not from me, and had the great scores. And we went in with one idea of how things were going to go. No, he ended up going to U of H, which he never thought he wanted to go to U of H. He didn't want to be right down the street. And he's at the U of H Honors College, and it has been the best thing. That's something that I don't think people talk about enough. The U of H Honors College is an excellent opportunity for Carnegie students. And I feel like I have to preach because they only accept about 600 kids. And it's been like, you know, they kind of hold them like this. It's like Carnegie, you know, like, oh, you're the little smart kids amongst all the other kids, you know, here you go. Everything that Danielle was just talking about, well-rounded students, you know, he didn't do any early decision because once he got this, you know, amazing score on his SAT, everyone was like, oh, you can go anywhere. So then he applied everywhere. He literally applied everywhere. He was like, okay, come on. And that's not the right approach. If we could do it over again, he should have applied early to the schools he really wanted to go to. So, really excellent advice. So thank you. That was really good.
That's super helpful too, because I know that I've watched from the sidelines as he went through and you guys decided, and him coming back and visiting Carnegie and stuff. And so it's cool to hear, like, to see the whole
because
you know,
you hear a lot of and I'll just go ahead and say he got a perfect SAT score, and I don't say that to brag. I say that to warn people, because a lot of people work so hard, like, oh, you know, my kid's got to get this, you know, whatever you think is the right score. So he got the perfect score, and we didn't pay anybody or whatever. He's good at testing. But I mean, he's a smart kid. Obviously, they're all smart kids, but he's good at testing. And so once he got a perfect SAT, everyone told him, "Oh, you can go anywhere." Big mistake. You know, and it really put the wrong idea in, so because he couldn't go anywhere. And it's not true.
You know, Maria, I have a family member who had a number of years ago a perfect ACT score and applied early to a school. She had done 2 summers on campus in a lab and was rejected, not even different.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I totally second what you're saying. It's like, these things are great to have and they are helpful, you know,
exactly.
You know.
Yeah. So, but I think they all end up where they're supposed to be, you know, because he's doing excellent and very happy and very well taken care of. So I couldn't be happier, but it was painful getting there. it was a lot of like, so good luck to everyone.
I wanted to say kind of what you said about they go where they're supposed to be. When students are bummed about a decision, I'm just a person that's a little bit faith-based, but I usually tell them, hey, like, you know, everything happens for a reason. That's always my approach. And maybe that's just not where you were supposed to be. And that's okay. That's fine. For the most part, everyone does end up where they're supposed to be, and they love it. Like students who get capped from UT end up going to one of the other locations like UTSA, and they stay because they like it. They've already built bonds and stuff like that. I think sometimes students just kind of let a lot of pressure get to them about where their friends are going, when really they just need to focus on where they're going.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate chicken or an egg thing in some ways, because it's like we're telling you need to have a sense of what would be a good fit, and like really have us, you know, know what that looks like and be able to articulate that. But we're also saying, don't get too hooked on this school because you may not get in, and you may need to be really excited about this other school. And so, you know, that's just like inherently part of this somewhat flawed process. So I think that's great to hear from you, Ms. Galloway, because I do think that almost like that family member of mine ended up in a fabulous place, and like it worked out beautifully. And so there are, you know, silver linings and things like that. So,
I have a question about early decision. Do you also get the financial, like what your cost is going to be at that time? Like, do you have a pretty good idea of what you're going
so
to?
that's going to depend, and Ms. Galloway may have a better blanket answer than I do. That's going to depend on the school. Like every school sort of does their timing of things differently. Most schools, as I understand it, like if you apply early decision and it's binding and you cannot afford to go there, and then they don't come through with what you need to be able to go there, then you know you're not, that is a reason for them to release you from the binding contract, if you will. The other thing that I should have maybe said earlier is a lot of the schools are also doing factoring in financial aid for other stuff, because you can get a great financial aid package for tuition or even maybe housing and things that you can't afford to study abroad, or you can't afford to go to certain things on campus or participate socially with your peers, or take certain internships or something, because you can't afford the living expenses to do those things. And so a lot of the schools are now more aware of that and sort of plugging that in. And so I guess that's not like, that doesn't answer your question, but that's just another follow-on piece that I think in the conversation around early decision and financial aid, that, you know, just be aware that there are often funds, and they may come through a different program or whatnot, but there are funds for these other pieces to the educational experience at the school.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to piggyback off of that, we never discourage a student from applying early decision. We just tell them, okay, if you're applying early decision to this school, we just kind of give them kind of pieces to think about. So if you're applying early decision, sit down with your parent and do the net price calculator for one, because it's kind of similar to the FAFSA. They pretty much ask for like tax information, and based on that information, they'll spit out a number of what they're expecting you to contribute. And so if the number is low and you speak with your parent and that's something that you guys can, you know, maybe work with, then okay, like that works. But we usually tell students, if you're going to do early decision, just make sure you're aware. Did you do the net price calculator? Do you know it's binding? You speak with your parent and stuff like that. But I do agree, students who do apply early decision, they do have higher chances of being in, as opposed to maybe early action and stuff like that. But if a student does apply early decision and, you know, they get that price and it's something they can be released from that binding contract.
Thank you so much both. I have a question about the interview. do all, well, I assume that all not all universities ask for an interview, and those who do, when is it, like in terms of timeline, when is it happening? And do
Well,
they
so-
interview all the applicants?
No, okay, so it depends on the school how they do it. So like Northwestern, for example, is only alumni. We know when I started, you could also interview on campus in the admission department, and you no longer can do that. And part of the reason for that is it wasn't equitable or fair. And you know, if some people could like afford to fly up there and like get in front of someone, you know, in that office versus having the alumni around the country, you know, doing those interviews. So they're all alumni driven. For early decision, they happen mostly in November, maybe in late October. For regular decision, they start, I think it's mid-January and go for about a month-ish. And for our school, we've had so it's optional, the interview is optional. And we've had such an escalation in applications from this region and the people asking, and of those candidates, people wanting an interview, that I could not accommodate through my volunteer group, all the students with an interview who requested an interview the last 2 years. We couldn't accommodate. And some of that's maybe with the pandemic and everything, applications also went up. So in those cases, for that school, there is a notation made in the file. If you have made a request and the school could not, through their alumni base, could not accommodate you, then we know that. So it will not hurt you. It can't work against you. Now, unfortunately, it can work for you if you have it, depending on, you know, how that interview goes or whatever. And so that, you know, that just sort of is what it is, but they will not let it work against you. And maybe Ms. Galloway has a better sense of just across the board, but I think it's a little bit different with every school. And Maria, maybe, you know, from last year.
It varied from school to school. It was kind of, you know, some would, my impression was that it was levels, like some were just a no, some were like, you got an interview, you got to that level. I think MIT gives most students that meet qualifications get an interview from an alumnus. So I think it just depends on the school. But for the most part, you have to kind of reach a certain level. And if you are just doing regular decision, my recollection was that most of them were in January, February, but it's all a blur now.
It's just like one piece of it, you know, it's no single factor is going to get your child in, you know.
Yeah, I feel like
maybe you're a fabulous oboe player from some town that they've never had a person from.
Yeah, to me, and that might just be like my child, I felt like essays were the one thing that he really like just waited and hemmed and hawed, and you know, of course, but he's just a math, he's math, and so that may just be him, but that was the one factor that varied, and he waited and whatever. There were not a ton of interviews, you know, but we were just coming off of the pandemic. Like it was just like things were just opening up. So things definitely probably are changing. And but I would say that as opposed to before times, the testing at like California, for example, and he really wanted to go to California. All the California schools wouldn't even accept his SAT score. So like he could mention it like in an essay, but otherwise like there was no even submitting it. So really like that factor, as opposed to like when we applied to colleges, you know, is much less of an important thing. So even a well-rounded student, you know, who's president of a, you know, club or, you know, does multiple things, really has to, you know, and then at Carnegie, again, everyone has a fairly high GPA. So, you know, it becomes challenging. But I think everyone has, you know, an excellent chance to find their fit. They just have to, I think ego for a lot of our students is the main obstacle, because they all want to say that they got into whatever it is that they have in their brain. For some of them, it's an Ivy League. For some of them, it's UT or it's whatever. And that may not be the right fit for them. It may not be the right school. I think once they get over the ego part, they're all going to be fine.
Oh, the other thing about interviews is I would put auditions and interviews for certain types of programs in the category of something like, if you know your student falls into, you know, a space where they would maybe need auditions or need an interview for a certain kind of, or an art portfolio or something, then that's obviously something to work with the college counseling team, because that interview or audition schedule and process will likely be very different than the school-wide one. So. Anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you. Oh, sorry, my printer is making a sound. Thank you all so much